Tonight we're going to talk about the Bamburgh sword. You can probably guess that. Bamburgh sword is it's a sword from Bamburgh Castle, and it's jolly interesting. 1959, Dr. Brian Hope Taylor, who was excavating at Bamburgh Castle, located a number of things. He was a professor at Cambridge University, and he'd been allowed by the late Lord Armstrong to excavate in the west ward of the castle and some outlying areas. He conducted a series of excavations between 1959 and the mid to late 70s, various years, various times. He came back many, many times. Used local people and students from Cambridge to excavate, and some of the staff at the castle excavated with Hope Taylor as children. So he had a long-standing association with the castle. During one of his excavations in either 59 or 60, we're not entirely sure when, he found a pit, and in that pit were 2 swords and an axe. He refers to them as a group of iron objects, including a sword blade and a woodman's axe. It's actually 2 swords in 3 pieces. One of the swords is broken in 2, the second sword is just one part of the sword, and it's actually the tang and upper part of the blade. Hope Taylor suggested that they were pre-Norman, and he was right, they certainly are. But then they vanish from the record, and they're lost to us, really. We encounter them again after Hope Taylor dies in 2001. He was still a professor at Cambridge, and he lived in Cambridge, and he died a fairly lonely, isolated death. And as his flat was being cleared out into various skips, one of his former students chanced by just to visit him, see how he was, and saw that all these possessions, lots of archaeological records, artefacts and paraphernalia were being thrown into a load of skips. And she was from the Royal Commission in Scotland. So she immediately flashed a warrant at them and said, "Stop this." Got a load of vans and took all the stuff back up to Scotland. So that's how the Hope Taylor Archive ended up in Scotland. Just pure dumb luck, really. Taken to Edinburgh, everything came out of his flat and his garage, and it was all in a big heap, unsorted. And it went up to Edinburgh, and then we were invited at that stage, a couple of years later, a year later I think, to go and have a look at the archive and see how much of it related to Bamburgh Castle, because by this stage we'd been excavating the castle for 4 or 5 years. So we were the people then, probably Graham and I were the people who then knew about the castle excavations and had a good insight into what was going on. We didn't know that there were any swords at this stage, although we had a fairly good guess, but we didn't know that these artefacts existed. They were just part of a wider archive, and they could have come from anywhere. So Graham and I went up to look at the archive in Edinburgh, and it was laid out in a very big room. And we opened up a suitcase, and inside were 2 swords and an axe. So alarm bells started ringing, and we eventually worked out that these were from Bamburgh Castle and were the very ones that he had referred to in his 1961 report. So the swords and the axe were returned to the castle after we'd established ownership in 2005, and that's really when we got to have a look at them properly. As soon as I saw the swords, I was pretty excited, because I had a very strong feeling that they were pattern welded swords. Pattern welded swords are the Porsches of the sword world. They're unbelievably hard to make. They're indescribably durable in battle, and they're very, very prestigious as items. They're only the very ultra elite would have had a pattern welded sword. Not many people would even have seen one, let alone owned one. You're talking about hundreds in the world ever. So they are extraordinarily rare. So to have 2 at Bamburgh Castle is something of a coup, really. These are the swords. The least interesting of the items is the axe at the top. And that's an iron axe which has a steel blade, scarf welded onto it. That's a very difficult thing to master. And that axe in its own right, on most excavations, would be a very prestigious find. And it's a lovely, lovely axe. And it's a broom axe, it's for planking, probably use it shipwright, that sort of thing. So you use it as a side axe for making straight edges in planks. Fantastic, yeah, we like axes. The bottom sword here, once we'd had it x-rayed, the Royal Armouries, comes back as a 4-strand pattern welded sword. So when we saw that, we were kind of very excited. It's very similar in construction and in design to the sword that was recovered from the Sutton Hoo Mound in 1939, so the big ship burial that belongs to, or well, allegedly belongs to an Anglo-Saxon king, Raedwald, is one of the interpretations of that. But then we come on to what's become the Bamburgh sword, the Bamburgh blade. That's a 6-strand pattern welded sword. So if you can imagine that a 4-strand belongs to a king, you don't know what 6-strand belongs to. And it's at Bamburgh Castle. So I became quite excited. There you go, everything I've just said. That's a bit of interpretation of the sword, and it's quite strong. You can see it's broken in, and that's probably when it stops being of any use. Because a broken sword's not really a lot of use, I suppose. So no for wedging doors out. It's the way it's made is extraordinarily complicated, and I'll go on to that slightly later in broad brush. I'll bore you with detail. But it's because of the way it is. It's relevant for a long, long time because the pace of change is very, very different in the early medieval. Things like this just don't go out of fashion, they don't become obsolete. It's just as easy to cut someone in two with one of these in the 7th century as it is in the 10th century. They don't go out of fashion. And this one has a long life, probably made in the late 6th, early 7th century, and it was deposited in the 10th century, so maybe even the late 10th. So it has a 300-year life above ground. So obviously a very, very useful object for a very long time. My interpretation of this is that it's an heirloom blade. A sword, effectively, in Anglo-Saxon society, a sword has a life of its own. It's not an object, it's a being, it's an entity. And swords have names, and they have pasts, and they have histories. So a sword would be a very important artifact to pass from father to son, from generation to generation. So if you owned a sword like this as a young warrior, you effectively own its reputation and you own its previous deeds. So if this sword passes to you and you're an inexperienced warrior, but it's had a long life of battle, you effectively own some of that battle readiness, and it makes you more of potentially of an elite warrior. I think most other warriors would know that that's not really true, but it's part of the mythos of swords and the life of the sword, and the origin myth and the way that swords get reputations. And certainly swords do have very strong resonance with people. And there are instances of kings having burial mounds opened so that they can extract the sword of one of their predecessors before they go into battle. These people definitely believe that these swords have strong magical and martial powers. They're not just wanting them as tools, they're wanting them as objects of mystery and as magnificent, powerful objects. And if you ever hold the Bamburgh sword, you'll start to feel a little bit of that. It is a very powerful object. So we took the whole lot of the armouries, it was examined. They originally thought that they weren't pattern welded at a first look, but after they were x-rayed, I got a phone call from the curator there, a very excited phone call. And he's normally an incredibly level man, but he was really excited when he phoned me up. And he said, they're pattern welded, you've got to come in. So I rushed over to Leeds, we had a look, and they were phenomenal. So under x-ray, you can see the scarf edging on the sword, 4 strands in there, that's there, just enlargements of them. But this is the middle one, and this is where all the pattern welding is in here. Iron tang, and then we've got an iron core with steel edges. Can't really see much detail on that, but under magnification it's there, I promise you. That's an illustration of it. So you get separate twisted patterns of billets running down the middle. These are all individually aggregated, twisted and shaped metal strips which are put together to make a composite blade. So you're not looking at a sword that's made out of one piece of iron or steel. This is made out of hundreds of individual pieces of iron that are put together to form the core and then edged in steel to give you a cutting edge. And it's a technology that's very advanced, and it's a similar technology to the Japanese style swords that we see in lots of samurai films and things like that. But if you, the Japanese technology goes into having edge strength, whereas this will give you all-round strength. The iron core allows for flex, so it means your sword is flexible, but the steel of the edge means it has incredible cutting quality. So there are various accounts that were often thought to be apocryphal of warriors when they were fighting duels stopping to straighten their swords. And so swords are fairly flimsy objects in the Anglo-Saxon and Viking period. Something like this, you wouldn't really need to straighten it. It would never bend that, but it has flex, and that's part of the art of using a sword, is to master that flex. And there have been extensive research done into the hilt and blade equilibrium. So when you're fighting with a sword, you have to have it balanced at what's called the sweet spot, which is normally about a third of the way down the blade, which allows for fluidity in the hand. And that's why you'll see weighted pommels on swords. So it allows, individual warriors have individual weights. So if you inherit a sword from your father, he might be much stronger or much weaker than you, so you have to have the blade adjusted, the weight adjusted on your pommel. So all this goes into the sword, and obviously you can't alter this once it's made. That's it, it's done. And it takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to make one of these. It would take a full day just to make one of these billets, easily a full day, and that's a very experienced smith. But it's mastered finally by the Anglo-Saxons. It's used in Britain a little, but mainly on the continent. And then the Vikings take it, 7th and 8th century, and they become a tour de force really with it. They make some of the best blades that have ever been made. A Viking smith called Ulfbert. Really, it's a family of smiths, I think, rather than a single bladesmith. And he makes swords that are really the first thing that gets knocked off. You find Ulfbert copies that are inferior with Ulfbert spelled incorrectly on them. So when you get a knock-off Japanese television now or something like that, they were doing it in the 9th and 10th century with swords and selling them for extraordinary amounts, because I'm guessing if you sell someone a sword and it fails in battle, they're not going to come back and ask for the money back. So it's not bad business really. So the technology, it's very complicated, and the idea is that you need to understand that iron and steel is a very complex material, and it's very variable in its quality. We're very used to homogeneous steel now, that we could just go to the superstore or whatever and you just buy a knife and it's made from one type of steel. But these people couldn't do that. They were getting rocks, melting them down and extracting iron and steel from them. So the quality is variable throughout all of the known world, really. And the best smiths have methods for combating that, and basically working the iron a number of times. So you basically hammer it flat, fold it over, hammer it flat, fold it over, and you do that until you get bored. And that disaggregates all the impurities within the metal. So you end up with a metal that still has impurity within it. You have hammered some of it out, but you've moved it to a series of various locations, so you're less likely to have them marrying up together, which will cause a catastrophic failure in your blade. So you're moving little bits of either slag or detritus up and down your blade, so it's never got one stress point. It's got a number of them, but they're so small that they become irrelevant. That's the idea. And once they hit upon the idea of making pattern welded weapons, I mean, they are almost all weapons. There's swords, spears, knives, axes and daggers. There's not really anything else that's made from pattern welded material until the modern era. Now you can get pretty much anything. But in the historic period, you don't get anything really except weapons. I'm pretty sure that no one else could afford stuff like that apart from elite warriors. So they're ironing out the impurities, spreading them through the material. Continue to work it again and again and again and again. And even with a power hammer these days, it's a boring process, just continuing to do that. And when When we've been smelting material, you get out, basically you get a lump that's like that, that's cinder, then you have to work it and cold work it, hot work it, cold work it, hot work it. And you do that forever and a day, and then you get a lump of metal that you can start to make the bits of the sword from. So it's long, labour intensive, very, very skilled work, but it's quite rewarding, I suppose. Pattern welding, really, the holy grail of pattern welding is to create bainite, which is an elongation of the structure, the metalline structure within it. It comes just after perlite, really. And once it's rapidly cooled, at the crucial point, so you have to know your material backwards. You have to know how to heat it, what to heat it to, how to spread it, not without applying too much stress to it, how to fold it, and how to make it reattach to itself, and then how to cool it at exactly the right point. Any of those fail, and your sword is useless. So it's a continuous process that you have to concentrate on all the time for up to, I think, about 1,000 hours probably to make a blade for a sword. And all of these things, what we call bainite now. Bainite was only identified in, I think, 1929. And so these people obviously don't know what bainite is. They don't know that they're promoting perlite growth or austatite, but they know how to make good swords. So a lot of things we've identified and given names to now, they're doing perfectly well 1,500 years ago, and doing a lot better than we can, to be honest. There's no one's yet made a sword like the Bamburgh sword that works. We can make them that look like it, but you destruction test them, you test them, and they fall apart fairly rapidly. So just starting to get there now, maybe. Some of the top smiths are. So you've got your strips of iron. They differ in the quality and the content of carbon contained within them. And what you need really is carbon, and gives you the capacity to sharpen, to make it rigid. So the more carbon you've got in it, really, up to about 1.2, then you're getting into steel territory, and that's what you need for your edges. Everything else, you need, whatever, it could be fairly homogeneous, and it can be fairly erratic, it doesn't matter so much. But you've got to get everything together then. So one of the things they do is, oh, I forgot that bit. Yeah, so the iron, they don't exclusively make their own iron. A lot of times they're trading iron with other countries, with other kingdoms, with other people. Some of the best smiths, some of the best swords that have ever come out of the Western Europe really, have got works steel in them, which comes from Persia and India. So they're trading with the Indian and Persian Empire in order to get good quality steel to incorporate them into Western blades. So it's kind of, it's an incredibly big business, and it's an incredibly complicated business that these people are engaged in. They quite often will get sword-shaped currency bars. These are discrete sword bars. These are from Denmark, I think. They're found on the south coast. But you can see they've got like the shape of a blade. And they're designed to be made into blades, and it's almost an assay mark. Tells you that this is blade steel, as opposed to normal iron, which comes in a pig, which is basically a block. So two different types of currencies in iron, and this is blade iron, which would be phenomenal to own if you could get hold of it. This belongs to Hector Cole, who's one of the world's best smiths. Once you've got your bits of iron, you elongate them, make them into strips, and then you have to start putting them together to make a sword. However, the sword is patterned, and so you don't just hammer together loads and loads of metal, you have to make a fantastic pattern in it as well. It's as much about art as it is about making something that's viable as a weapon. So it has to be a brilliant weapon, and it has to be a work of art. So you're getting into difficult territory there. So you get 7 or 8, well 7 or 9 strips of metal, and you can see, that's blue, 7 strips there. And then you lay them on top of each other and you weld them together. So that in itself is a very difficult process. Once they're welded, you measure, and then you twist. And every X amount, so every 4 inches, you put a twist in, 2 twists, and that gives you a stripy pattern and a linear pattern. And then you heat it up and you put it to one side, and then you do that with the next one, you do that, but you've got alternate twists here. So one's twisting that way, one's twisting this way. However, as soon as you heat them up again, they go black. You can't tell where the twist is. So you're working blind. So you have to know at all times which is the right end, which is the right twist, which is the right face. So it's an exercise in maths as well as art, as well as warfare. So you have to concentrate constantly. And I can imagine that if you got to the point where you're about to forge a blade and you work out that one of them's got twisted and you've got an irregular pattern, you're pretty annoyed, I think. So they're constantly doing this. And these, you need to bear in mind that once you start to work this blade, it will change shape because you're fullering in the middle, so you're moving metal to the edges. So some of these are marginally thinner than others. So you might narrow it at these points because when you put your fuller in, you'll move it out a little. So they're not just making these uniformly, they're making them to a mathematical formula. Basically, I think they've got a table where they draw it up and they know exactly what they're doing. They'll work it out and they'll waste it and then make it so that you can move the metal to the right place. And you know, they're phenomenal. Well, yeah, you've probably worked out I quite like them. So this is the billet once it's welded. And you can see, you can't see anything in there at all. So that's what you're working with. Once you've welded it up, you really don't know what you're doing. Everything's blind from that point. You can stop periodically and etch it. That's a waste of time and a waste of energy. And also, I mean, normally at this stage, I just put that in the bell grinder and have a look, see what the pattern is. But obviously that's not open to an Anglo-Saxon smith. So I have the opportunity to work out if I've messed up. But that's the value of bench grinders. So this is one of them about to be welded together. You can see it starts at one end and then you have to weld all of this all together all the way along 7 times and then not get it wrong when you're twisting it and then make sure they fit together in the right order, facing in the right direction. That's a close-up of one of the billets. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 there. So these are being put together now to make the core of the weapon. So these are gradually being forged together. Again, you still can't see the pattern yet. And once you've got that, you've got the core of the blade. So you've got your full iron core, which is beautifully patinated all the way through. Or patterned, I suppose. Then you have to edge it with steel. So this is the central core here. Then you have to get an enormously long piece of steel, single piece, and weld it on. And that has to be done in one act. So you are welding for 2¼ hours, something like that, constantly using charcoal, hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold, and you can't stop. It's very taxing and very irritating when you get it wrong because that just has to come off again and you start again. So there aren't many smiths who can do that. Modern smiths, there's 2 or 3 that I know who can do this, and that's in Britain and America, so or the United States. There are more and more smiths who are getting proficient at this now, so we see more and more blades, but there's still only a handful of smiths who are good enough. And you can see there, once you get it up to temperature, you start to edge it, and your edge starts to aggregate and come together and to make a single unit. Now it's heated up, you can still see some of the pattern in there if you look closely. That's a 3-strand one, and that's got pattern welding all the way to the edge. That will be edged in steel as well, but it shows you some of the variation in the patterns here. So you don't have to have patterns that make echelons. Is that a word? Yeah, echelon. And you can put stripes in them, spiders into them, or you can put initials into them. You can put anything you want with modern techniques. So you can make them for. I've seen them with little reindeer pulling sleds in them. Put into the pattern welding by the smith. So, you know, it's just, as I say, it's artistry as well as irritating. So that's it, partially welded on there, and then strapped up, ready to continue the weld. So you can sort of get an idea of what's involved. Then you have the full of the blade, because obviously a blade that has been forged is just a lump of steel and iron, and it's practically useless. You might as well hit someone with a bar, because that's effectively what it is. It's not sharp, and it's unbalanced, and they're useless until they're fullered. The fullering process then, so that gives you currency bar, billets, welding, edging, down into edging, and then finished blade with the fullering about to begin in there. So you've cut it to blade shape into fullering. Fullering is basically putting a channel down the middle of the blade on both sides. And it gives you a structure that's like an I-beam. So you have the strength of something, you know, like an I-beam that you use in construction. So you've got elongated sides and narrowed middle. So it gives you a lateral strength, and it makes it slightly flexible. It can twist it slightly as well. And basically these two iron rods here, well they're steel those, you lay your blade in the middle and you hit the top one as hard as you can. Well, if you've got any sense, you get someone else to hit it. And then you gradually just moving the sword through as it's red hot. So I mean, well, it's in an orange state like this normally. So you'd be hammering that through, forging it, and you've got to make sure that it's equal all the way through, and it's moving metal to the sides at the same time. So forming a bar structure that's got an eye to it so that you can flex it. And that's moving the pattern around as well. Then you've got to start heat treating. So all you've got so far is an iron bar that's made into an eye shape. Heat treating's, that's one of the mystical things, and you hear people talk about heat treating all the time, and people talk about that they were normalising, and then they were tempering, they were quenching in urine. You'll hear anything you can think of quenching in blood, that you just not total nonsense, but people talk about it, and they talk about it all the time. So the idea is that you're taking the temperature to the maximum it will go to, and then you quench it. So you put it into something cool. So water is the normal one. And once that's done, it's aligned the structure within the steel and the iron. So everything polarizes under the magnetic field of the Earth. It puts everything in one direction, and as you quench it, it just locks it into shape. But that makes it quite brittle. So then you have to temper it. So that means bringing it back enough away from the polar north so that it won't snap. So you're basically giving it a quality where it's still rigid and sharpenable, but is workable and useful as a tool, or a weapon in this case. So it's critical. If you do it too slowly, it's soft. Do it too quickly, it's brittle. However, if you get bainite, then you're onto a winner. And that's really what we're looking for. If you start to find bainite in Anglo-Saxon swords or Viking swords, you know you've got a phenomenal quality sword. I was at a conference about 8 or 10 years ago, and I ended up talking to an expert in structural metals. And he had been one of the keynote speakers, and he was talking about fluid dynamics in the quenching process. And they had discovered a process where if you have something at critical temperature and then immerse it in a fluxed fluid, it will give you a super quench. Because if you quench iron, if you put iron into water, it creates a vapor jacket around it. It superheats the water around it and creates a steam jacket which doesn't promote the heat transfer. It locks it into place. However, if the water, or oil in this case, is in flux, if you're constantly agitating it, water is moved against the blade and it breaks the heat vapor barrier. So you've got a much better chance of getting a quench that's accurate and controllable. At Bamburgh Castle, we've got one of those things that I've been looking at for years and years, and Graham and I have discussed it on and off for, I don't know, best part of 15 years, I suppose. And it's a trough that's about on the angle of sword length. And it's got a channel running into it and a channel running out of it. And a little light went on in my head when I was talking to this chap. And if you heat a sword in the 7th century and drop it into water in there while someone's pouring water down the top, it agitates and then comes out of the bottom. And you've got a 7th century mechanism that we're only just starting to understand now. So I think that probably is the key to why the Bamburgh sword is in existence. And if you try and get your head around that, it's quite difficult really, that we don't really understand the structure of it now, we just know it works. So the dynamics of it are still being modelled, and they're messing about with this stuff 1,500 years ago incredibly well. So once you've locked in the flavour of the blade, you have to grind it and then etch it. Etching is a difficult process. You're basically highlighting the differences in the irons and steels. So the amount of carbon is variable, but your bars will all have constant carbon content within them. So you'll get black and grey patterns locked in with them. The best way to do it is with urine, basically. That's the most caustic substance that we can get. So you immerse it in an enormous vat of urine and leave it there for a couple of days, and then you get someone else to take it out, and then and then you polish it up. So, and then you can start to edge it. And that's what one of these swords looks like. This one's made by Owen Bush, I don't know, about 10 or 12 years ago now, and I think it's in the Armouries, this one. That's a 4-strand one that's very similar to the one that came out of the castle and the one from the Sutton Hoo burial. So you can see some of the pattern in it and some of the fluidity in it. And the beauty of it's like water. It's often called water metal. The idea that you get fluidity within it that looks like water. It's as if you've immersed something in water and it's running down the blade. This one's obviously not. This is just in its blade shape and hasn't really been fully sharpened, but that's kind of irrelevant. And that gives you the pattern that you're getting in the middle. These are the little twists in it, and these are the straight parts. So you can see that some of the patination is coming up. And they're talked about as being serpents as well, serpents locked within the steel, within the iron. So they think that it's this sinuous sort of movement within it that gives it a mystical quality. This is a copy of the Fetter Lane sword that was made. The blade was made by Mick Maxon, and it's been the hilt was complete, but we've been informed a lot by the Sutton Hoo treasure. But the blade itself is a work of art, and you can see it's double-fullered, so that doubles the amount of problems you've got when you're moving the metal around. But it is a phenomenally amazing sword, pattern welded again with great hilt. And some of the scabbard was surviving, as in this was all surviving, and some of it was locked onto the blade as well. I think this is elm, I think, I can't remember. And that's an artist's interpretation we had made of the one at the castle from a time before the Sutton Hoo hoard, not Sutton Hoo, Staffordshire hoard was located. And you can see the handle is pretty bland, really. I think that was a time before we really generally understood just how ostentatious these could be. So we sort of, I blanded it down a little bit. Then they start to find things like this. And you start to realise that the blade isn't the key. For a long time I was under the misapprehension that the blade was the important thing. The blade obviously is crucial in war, but not everyone goes to war. And everyone who goes to war spends a lot of their time not at war. So they're parading around looking. So basically if you draw your sword, that's a pretty big step to take. People don't just draw these and say, have a look at that. You don't hand your sword to someone else. They stay in their scabbard all the time, unless you're serious. So this is really the key to the mindset of the people who are using these swords. Psychotic peacocks, that's what they've been called. And they are pretty aggressive people. You're talking about a person who lives in a war band. That's what they do all of their life. They're brought up talking about war. They're brought up playing war games. The evenings, they sing songs about war. They boast about what they've done. They play chess and games like that, things about strategy. Then they'll do a bit of wrestling. Then they'll get drunk and have a fight. Then the next day, they'll get up with a hangover and have a fight. Then they'll do it all again. And that's what they do all the time in preparation for war. They might even do a bit of archery, just to vary it. So these people, that's all they do. They are locked into a warrior lifestyle. They are complete warriors. And if you want some kind of analogy, it would be like the Waffen-SS or the SAS or somebody like that. Somebody whose whole world is just war for the period where they're locked into this warrior lifestyle. You can walk away from it eventually. However, there's a catch. You can't afford one of these. No one can afford one of these swords. They are priceless, literally priceless. So you have to hope that your king or your leader will give you one. So the kings and leaders quite often will inherit them, or they'll be given them when someone walks away. So these are, you can disperse them at your will if you're a king. So you present something like this to a young warrior, that warrior owes you a debt, and that debt is completely unpayable. You cannot pay the value of that sword back. So you've got a warrior effectively for life, and if that warrior returns the sword to you, there's a huge loss of face there, it's dishonour, so they're locked into a cycle. And some warriors do eventually go off and have lives beyond war, but not all the time, and they normally get pensioned off and then get dragged back if there's a war. So it's kind of, they're locked into a weird little world where there's only 300 or 400 of them who then will go off and fight another 300 or 400 from a neighbouring kingdom or from a distance. And it's a world I think that most people wouldn't even encounter. If 300 warriors come across your land, so what? They're going somewhere else to have a fight. And even if they're having a fight on your doorstep, it makes no difference. They're not interested in you, they're interested in the other warband. And this is the reason they're interested in the other warband, because they've all got stuff like this. So if you can defeat another king or another warband, you can take all their stuff, and you're immeasurably wealthy. So you look at this, the Staffordshire hoard, we don't know how much it was worth, we can't even begin to understand how much it was worth. I mean, it's millions and millions and millions and millions. To us it's millions, to them it would have been immeasurable. Each of these garnets takes a day and a half to make. So, and they're all cut into little crystalline structures, and they're all perfectly made round little gold filigree things. And it's like, one of these would take a week to make, a skilled craftsman, out of metal that's incredibly precious. So these all go on the top of your blade, and they're the bit that tell you that the warrior is a person of importance. And I think if you imagine you're in battle, and you see someone coming towards you, and you think you might have a fair chance, you've got a spear, you've got a shield, and then you see a pattern welded blade, and you know that all this warrior has ever done is train to kill people like you. And I think that's when you start to get frightened and think, what am I doing here? So I think the first battle's fought in the mind, and I think these elite warriors, a lot of times they don't even have to fight, people just run away from them. If you've got any sense, you would. So I think this is all power, it's all the way that you show your power. I can afford this, or at least my overlord can. I can afford a sword blade that you haven't even seen. You know, it's ostentatious, beyond, to the thousandth. They're phenomenally important blades to the people there. That's from the Staffordshire hoard. 301, I can't remember how many sword hilts were there. So, a lot anyway, that's a whole band's worth. Along with a gold helmet, a cross, who knows what else is in there, but there's masses and masses, and I think that's probably what happened at the end of one battle. They take all the stuff, and it just gets deposited because either someone's run away with it, or it's got lost. I mean, how you'd lose that, I have no idea, but it's kind of somebody has somewhere. Why are they important? I think we all know that now, don't we, really? They're pretty important. So, clearly identifiable. You see them, you know exactly what they are. They're extraordinarily expensive. So, full-time warriors are very dangerous, and they're probably magic. So, long-lived, massively sharp, and wielded by lunatics. So it's kind of, no, you can't use that. I think that's it. So, yeah, pattern on the swords.